All right, good evening. Welcome on behalf of the Military Liaison Committee of the AAST. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Brian Gavitt, and I'm an Air Force trauma surgeon currently stationed in the United Arab Emirates, and I serve as the chair of the DHA Military Civilian Partnership Working Group. We'd like to welcome you to this webinar series on behalf of myself, as well as Dr. Colonel Jennifer Gurney, the chair of the Military Liaison Committee, who's unable to be with us tonight as she's traveling for work. So tonight is the first in a series of webinars focused on common questions about forming, building, and maintaining military-civilian partnerships. As many of you are aware, military partnerships have been around in the US since at least the 1950s, serving as platforms for knowledge exchange and deployment readiness. Military personnel assigned to these civilian institutions provide high volume, high acuity trauma care that doesn't exist in most military hospitals, but is critical to be able to deploy and provide combat casualty care. In recognition of the importance of MilCiv partnerships, Congress passed and the President signed the Mission Zero Act into law in 2019 as part of a larger legislative package. The Mission Zero Act, or MZA, established a grant program within the Department of Health and Human Services to support broader and wider development of MilCiv partnerships with large, high-volume trauma centers. In fiscal year 22, Congress appropriated the first funds for Mission Zero Act, and 25 trauma centers across the United States were awarded funds through the program, and FY23 funds are forthcoming as well. With the renewed focus on MilCiv partnerships, the Military Liaison Committee, in cooperation with MISPACs, felt it was important to host a forum to share experiences and best practices from leaders who've led some of the premier MilCiv partnerships in coordination with each of the three services, the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. Each of the webinars in this series, this being the first, will focus on a set of common questions that routinely arise when building, considering, or managing a MilCiv partnership. The first 5 questions for today's webinar will largely focus on aspects of building MilCiv partnerships, and subsequent webinars will focus on different aspects of the relationships. While the majority of the discussion today will focus on the pre-selected questions that we'll run through, we've opened the chat to allow members of the audience to submit additional questions that we'll attempt to answer during this or subsequent sessions. One very useful resource we'd encourage all audience members to review is the Blue Book. There's a QR code on the screen that links to the download page. The Blue Book was a project led by MISPACs and provides information on multiple aspects of MilCiv partnerships. While this isn't a DoD policy document, it addresses many of the key factors that need to be considered when building a program in partnership with the DoD. So we talk about MilCiv partnerships as one entity, but each one of them is in fact quite different. And that's part of what we hope to highlight. Each of our panelists tonight represent programs that differ in structure, staffing, scope, and service. And we hope this prompts discussion and collaboration moving forward. On this slide are the 5 questions that we're planning to address tonight, time permitting. Each of the panelists will have a chance to answer each and discuss key lessons learned from their experience. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So Dr. Bulger is the former chair of the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma and the current medical director for the ACS Committee on Trauma. She's the chief of surgery at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, Washington. Harborview Medical Center has multiple affiliations with the Department of Defense for training, research, and clinical currency. Next, Dr. Kerby is the current chair of the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma and the director of the Division of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. UAB has multiple affiliations with the DoD for both hospital and pre-hospital personnel, and Dr. Kerby is also former Air Force. Dr. Chovanes is an Army Reserve Colonel and the Chief Surgeon of the Section of Military, Diplomatic, and Field Surgical Affairs at Cooper University in Camden, New Jersey. Cooper University has active partnerships with multiple federal agencies, including the DoD. Dr. Schreiber is also an Army Reserve Colonel and the head of the Division of Trauma, Critical Care, and Acute Care Surgery at Oregon Health and Science University. OHSU has affiliations primarily with the U.S. Army. Next, Dr. Jeff Bailey is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel and current faculty at Washington University in St. Louis and at the Uniformed Services University in Bethesda, Maryland. Dr. Bailey is a past chief of the DoD's Joint Trauma System, and he has extensive experience in MilCiv partnership establishment and operation. Next, Dr. Fraser is the trauma director at the University Medical Center in Las Vegas and the associate director of UMC's Office of Military Medicine. UMC has built their Office of Military Medicine to coordinate the large and growing relationship with the DoD and primarily with the U.S. Air Force. Next, Dr. Grabo, who may be joining us a little bit later, served in the U.S. Navy and is now the Director of Trauma Education at the West Virginia University Critical Care and Trauma Institute. West Virginia University has established relationships with both Special Operations and the U.S. Army. And last but not least, Dr. Schwab is also former U.S. Navy surgeon and the founding chief of Penn Medicine's Trauma Center. Penn has longstanding relationships with the military and with the U.S. Navy in particular. And before moving on to the discussion, I'd just like to introduce the moderators. In addition to myself, Dr. Knudsen is the medical director for the Military Health System Strategic Partnership with the American College of Surgeons, or MISHPACS, which I'd mentioned previously. She's also the trauma faculty at UCSF and served as senior visiting surgeon in Iraq. And also, before moving to the questions, the Military Liaison Committee, and on behalf of Colonel Gurney, we'd like to thank the AAST Board of Managers for their generous support of this and other military-associated initiatives. We appreciate the strong relationship and wanted to acknowledge your leadership and generosity. And without further ado, I'm going to turn over the mic to Dr. Knudsen. And again, I'd encourage audience members to submit questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them, time permitting. Dr. Knudsen.
Great. Thank you, Brian, and welcome all of you out there. I see there are 87 participants in this conference, which is great for all of us. So we're going to jump right into the questions. Before we start, I just wanted to mention one other thing that Brian hasn't had a chance to say. One of the initiatives for getting more military-civilian partnerships really came from Dr. Trunke. This was after the first Gulf War, when he recognized that many of the surgeons who had been deployed to that war were actually not active in trauma. And so with the GAO report, there were 5 military-civilian partnerships that were established, what we called the first 5. That included the Army down at Ryder in Florida, the Navy at USC, and the Air Force had to have 3 of them. One of them was at the University of Maryland and Shock Trauma, Cincinnati for the Sea Stars program, and then St. Louis. So those were the first 5. After the idea of Mission Zero happened, there have been many other new partnerships established, and we're going to hear from many of those today. So I'm going to go around to the panelists and ask them to describe number 1, what type of partnership they have. Do they have a permanent cadre of people? Are there rotations? How many people are involved in them? How long that they've had these established? And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of some of the planning questions. So I'm going to start with Dr. Bulger and ask her what is going on at the University of Washington in relationship to MilCiv partnerships.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Knudsen. It's really an honor to be with everyone today, and I'm really excited to see the growth and the development of these partnerships. At the University of Washington Harborview Medical Center specifically, we have, I think, actually 3 different types of partnerships. So the longest lasting partnership we've had is actually around resident and fellow training. We partnered with Madigan Army Medical Center, which is just south of us and has a residency program to train their residents for both surgery and emergency medicine for many years, probably over 20 years. And that's been a long-standing relationship. And out of that has come several fellows that have trained in our program, and then even some faculty that we've made have joint appointments so they can rotate with us. So that's sort of a pre-existing a lot of the development of formal MilCiv partnerships, but I think an important component of the training for residents. Our other 2 partnerships we've had one for about 10 years, where we've had rotators of Special Forces and PJ Whiskey medics. These medics rotate in our emergency department, they rotate in our burn center and in the ICU, and they get procedural experience that way. It's sort of a rotating basis, anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks per medic, but they're pretty much continuously here. And then the most recent partnership we have, which is now about 4 years old, is developing a formal, through the AMTC 3 program of the Army, developing a formal program to integrate entire forward surgical team here from Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is again to the south of us near Madigan. That program is a fully embedded program where providers are assigned to us for a period of 3 years. They're full faculty, so we currently have 2 surgeons fully embedded, 1 emergency medicine physician, a CRNA, and a couple of nurses. And their duty station is assigned Harborview. They live nearby. They don't live down at the base, and they are fully integrated as members of our hospital. That program is slated to continue to grow to the point where we can have all members of the forward surgical team integrated and have them rotating on a regular schedule for deployment. So that's our most recent program, but I think the most extensive.
Thank you, Dr. Bulger. And you brought up a very good point, is that some of the successes of these partnerships have to do with being physically located near a base, so that the rotating or the cadre of military personnel don't have to travel or move to be part of a partnership. So something very important to consider. So let's go a little south to Oregon, and we'll hear from Dr. Marty Schreiber.
Thank you, Peggy, and thanks to Brian and Jen Gurney for inviting me on this panel. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. We have something similar to what Eileen described, but a little bit different. We also have 3 programs. The first program, we actually have 1 active duty Army resident assigned to us per year. And that is through a match program. The medical students, the Army medical students, have an opportunity to either match through the military or match into civilian programs. And we're one of the civilian programs where they can match. And we have 1 per year. That's been going on for about 4 years. Our second program is also the AMCT3 program. We have 7 individuals in that. It started in 2019. We have 2 general surgeons, 1 cardiac surgeon, 1 emergency medicine doctor, 1 CRNA, 1 emergency medicine nurse, and 1 ICU nurse. And we're in our second rotation of that. They come for 3 years. They're fully embedded, live in Portland, and usually get deployed in the middle of their rotation. So we're on our second rotation there. The third program that we're participating in is the SMART program. The SMART program is a rotational program involving the 68 series, the MOS 68, which is OR techs, LPNs, and combat medics. And these individuals come through for 2 to 3 week rotations, and they actually work throughout the hospital under a supervisor. So they're not independently licensed. They're only here for 2 or 3 weeks. They stay in a hotel, but these individuals in general do not generally work in the hospital in their home setting. And this is the only introduction to actually working in a hospital setting. The combat medics go out into the field with our medics and get a great experience there. The OR techs spend most of their time in the operating room being OR techs, and the LPNs rotate throughout the hospital. They all get opportunities to do ICU, do IVs, other procedures, work in ICUs and other settings. So that's our program, again, starting in 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Let's leave the Army now and hear from the Navy. So I'm going to ask Dr. Schwab to pick up here.
Thanks very much. It's an honor to participate, and I'll save some time and cut to the chase. Ours is a relatively new program. Actually, it went live in October of 2021. It's with the United States Navy through the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. It is a fully embedded program, and I have to say that it is a proof of concept program. And what we are given and what we asked for was a cadre of 11 Navy professionals, 1 administrator, and 10 providers. 4 physicians fully embedded in the practices here. They are a trauma surgeon, a general surgeon, an anesthesiologist, and an emergency physician. We have 3 nurses, again, fully embedded in their units, and they are in the emergency department, in critical care, and in the operating room. We also have 2 allied health professions, a perioperative technician, as well as a certain rescue technician. And last, we have a physician's assistant, someone that we've come to know as the utility player. What's interesting about this is a 3-year full commitment of these 11 individuals assigned to Penn without rotation out. And the reason is because the understanding and the memorandum of understanding with the United States Navy is to actually study curriculum skills and look at other things that are necessary in order to plan for future warfare, as well as to be able to train people in mid to senior ranks so that there is a group of teachers and a group of influential people within the United States Navy to advise and direct the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery about further training. We also are being looked at to go ahead and to start a program which is yet unnamed. For those of you that are familiar with Illinois, the program has been stood up in Cook County Hospital, and that's where we'll take forward emergency or surgical units, a 7-member team, and rotate them in. Very similar to what Dr. Schreiber just described. They'll be assigned for 3 years and they'll rotate actually out in their 2nd year. But until we complete our proof of concept program, our team is fully embedded and function both individually on call in their units with normal shifts as full faculty, as well as one full 24-hour period every week. They are fully on as an independent trauma team, taking all the trauma that comes in. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schwab. And you brought up a very important point, and that's the ability to bring in an administrator as part of the team so that they understand how the hospital as a trauma center functions, something that we don't often think about. Let's go to Dr. Kerby, who has had a long-standing program with the Air Force.
Thank you very much, Peggy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's a real honor. Our experience started in 2006, the 720th Special Tactics Squadron out of Hurlburt Field in Florida. Had a program in New Orleans, of course, that was no longer possible after Katrina hit in 2006. So they reached out to us, and we were very happy to accommodate them and transfer that program to our facility. We started with PJs, pararescue jumpers, soft medics were the primary trainees. We had 1 to 2 PJs or medics every 2 weeks. So a fairly small program to start off with. It has grown over time. There's more structure to it now. We've actually gotten an acronym. So, you know, you've made it when you got an acronym. So we're SOCMID. We're the Special Operations Center for Medical Integration and Development. So last year we had 174 PJ soft medic rotators through UAB. And we just got approval to be the total force option for PJ and soft medic Air Force trauma training. So we're expecting 300 to 400 when we're fully plussed up and at full capacity. In 2010, the Special Operations Surgical Teams, also out of Hurlburt Field, reached out to us. They weren't getting much trauma experience at Eglin Air Force Base Hospital, where they were stationed and on staff. So they reached out and asked if we could work on a affiliation where they could send one SOS team to us. That SOS team consists of 6 personnel, a general surgeon, an anesthesia provider, emergency medicine provider, an OR technician, critical care nurse, and respiratory therapist. That started in 2010, and over time we've added additional teams. We're up to 4 teams now and have 24 active duty military embedded personnel at UAB Hospital in our trauma programs and other places in the hospital. Those teams take trauma call as a team, they train as a team, and they deploy as a team. And they have a pretty high operations tempo. We typically have 1 to 2 teams that are deployed and 1 to 2 teams back home here working clinically. Beyond that, we also have, through the Defense Health Agency, we have 1 of our 8 general surgery residency slots that is devoted to a military resident. That started, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. I think very similar to Marty's program in Oregon. We will take a general surgery resident to active duty. So those are the 3 programs that we have currently at UAB.
Thank you, Jeff. And really important point of having the teams that train together, deploy together. Not everybody has that luxury, but certainly an important thing to consider. Another very long-standing Air Force program is in St. Louis, and we have Dr. Jeff Bailey joining us to describe that program.
Thanks, Peggy, and for the group. My apologies for the background if it's distracting, but broadcasting from a place of opportunity today. Can you hear me, Peggy?
Yes, we can hear you, and I think That's one of those codes for I can't say where I'm at.
Yeah, I can say where I'm at. I can show you where I'm at. I'm in a park, but in any case, just try not to be distracted by that. Thanks for inviting me. The St. Louis Sea Stars program is a very, as you said, old program. Its origins predate the global war on terror. It evolved from a guard platform in the early 2000s to a total force platform that included guard, reserve forces, and also active duty. The original platform was in a county level 2 trauma center. It moved to the level 1 trauma center at St. Louis University in 2002, and then is expanded from there to include the pediatric level 1 trauma center affiliated with the St. Louis University, as well as the other level 1 trauma center in St. Louis, which is of course Washington University, where I'm on faculty, and then also includes rotations at the burn unit. So really St. Louis is, I would say, a community partnership. In terms of the spectrum of participation, it includes embedded full-time cadre, which are, include surgeons and other healthcare providers, nurses, technicians, and an administrator. And then the rotational or the participation from the folks that are not full-time assigned or not civilians in St. Louis are 3 different types, all 3 types, which are the rotational model where people are coming in for an experience. Usually that it's a course. It's actually been a formal course for quite a long time. It's a 2-week experience, which is basically an immersion in trauma care. That's, I think, still just at St. Louis University. The agreement with Washington University does not yet include the rotational model. Then there's the part-time embedded folks who are assigned to facilities around the area that come and spend a short period of time in active practice. They are independently credentialed. The rotational model, they're not independently credentialed. And then there's the full-time embed model, which is where we've got active duty surgeons that actually participate in all of those different platforms. There are other partnerships, and that's the part of this that's a little bit still foggy. There are other partnerships that involve other military organizations that participate in St. Louis. And one of the challenges, as Brian may be able to tell you, is really getting our arms around the full complement of military civilian partnerships that support the sustainment of trauma and readiness skills. So I think that's what I've got for now. Thanks again for including me.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And for those of you in the audience who are not part of the military, the idea of training in pediatric, especially pediatric trauma, is really important, because one of the things that we don't always appreciate as civilians is there's a lot of humanitarian work that goes along even during deployment, where you're required and are willing to take care of injured civilians of the host nation. So that's an added benefit, I think, to the program in St. Louis. Dr. Chovanes, I believe that you are running a relatively new Army program up there in New Jersey. Maybe you can describe that for us.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. We were actually one of the first, along with Marty, programmed in 2019 to host the AMCT3. So I would describe us, listening to all the panelists, as a hybrid program. So we have the active duty embedded here. We have the SMART, the enlisted that rotate through. We have a GME component, anesthesia. We have Special Operations Command with the Army and the Navy. So those are more students rather than they're getting up to speed. And then we have the National Guard Bureau. So we have 5 primary military participants, and that's all through our office. We have a central office, military, diplomatic, and field affairs. As Dr. Kerby said, you have to have an acronym. So we call it MILDAF, and we have an acronym. And then we have, as you mentioned, ma'am, in our beginning introduction, we also have grown into other people interested organizations. So the State Department actually started with this with us here, and then we are well prepared with state, the Guardians, which are a section within state, the Department of Justice. So we have the FBI, Special Medics, and ATF we just signed with. and then the Department of Homeland Security. So overall, about 8 programs, all through MILDAF, active duty embedded. They live here, students, residents, and then the PAs. So a wide range of different types of learners or teachers or both.
So embedding the legal people and the police is sort of something new that we haven't heard about. So that's a very interesting component for your program. Dr. Fraser, would you like to talk about your program?
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Knudsen, and everybody, especially Dr. Gavitt and Gurney, that were invited me. I feel really honored and very appreciative to be here today. We've been doing this for quite some time, going back as far as 2002. We had the sustainment for the Air Force medics embedded in very close proximity here to Mike O'Callaghan Military Medical Center at the active duty Air Force Base of Nellis, the short driving distance. So that's definitely key. We have all kinds of rotators from our medics and respiratory therapists and scrub techs, surgeons. We have every specialty from emergency medicine, pulmonary critical care, OBGYN, ophthalmology, orthopedics, everything that you would have at a major trauma center that they rotate through. Our trauma surgeons are indistinguishable between myself and our full-time university faculty. Dr. Stephanie Streit is here for quite some time, and she's actually led the charge to have Nellis come on board as a level 3 trauma center in our community, which was really outstanding to see. We have Office of Military Medicine, which makes it all happen, which is a definite key point. I would say for those that are thinking about this. We have our director, Dr. Kilburn, who's pulmonary critical care, that many of you probably know, and he's just phenomenal and really kind of the glue that keeps this entire thing together. We have nurse practitioner, Dr. with Allison Anderson, who's key far as our deputy associate director for that military medicine office. And Jeremy has a great slide where he shows kind of all these different points of communication and leadership and command. And that really is the central point now where we have everybody go do for credentialing and make it all happen. We then in 2010 became part of the STARS program as well for that sustained readiness, and that developed even further and grew even more into what we have the sustainment medical and readiness training SMART program, which was back in 2014. We also have the opportunity for the teams to come in. They have the SOS teams, the Surgical Operations team in 2017, and they'll come on and they'll partner up to be on their entire group together. So you'll have your anesthesiologist, your emergency medicine doc, the trauma surgeon, and everything like they'd be downrange, and they get to operate lifetime with our level 1 trauma patients, which are pretty sick coming in here. So it's a real amazing opportunity for them. Myself, I have no military background, but it's nice for our civilian trauma surgeons to be able to, give some time and stuff to our active duty men and women and help them in the trauma bay, from our medics putting in IVs and nurses and respiratory therapists. And it's really a phenomenal working partnership that we have that's been here for a long time. And, very, very happy to be here today.
Great, thank you, Dr. Fraser. And I think you might want to allude also to the point that your base was extremely helpful when the Vegas shooting happened. I know that many of you came over to the trauma centers and helped out. So congratulations on getting to your level 3 verification through the Committee on Trauma. Dr. Grabo, have you been able to join us? Hearing crickets. Are there any, on topic 1, the different models, are there any questions from the audience in the chat?
Nothing in the.
Okay, so let's go on to question 2 then. So if you were to set up a new partnership or looking to set up a new partnership, besides having what we want to call a surgeon champion to really bring the program forward, who else in your institution would be important if you were planning a new military civilian partnership for those who are looking to establish one, or from your own experience, who did you have to get involved on the civilian side to make this happen? So I'm going to ask Dr. Kerby if he could start that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dr. Knudsen. So what we did when we first started our program, we basically talked to anybody we thought would want to listen to this story to get buy-in. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So we, of course, talked to the C-suite. We talked to the CEO of the hospital, the CFO of the hospital, particularly with billing implications and how that would look and how that would work. We talked to legal about this just to make sure there was no issue there. We actually developed a training affiliation agreement with legal and the military legal. So that was an important component of this. And we went and visited all the clinical department leads, including our chief nursing officer, because we had critical care nurses that were going to be a part of particularly the special operations surgical teams. So we spent a long time going around and visiting with each of these individuals just to make sure that we had broad support for the programs, and we were very fortunate in that we did have broad support. I think one thing we did when we went around and talked to everybody, we tried to manage expectations, and we also tried to temper what these individuals would bring as far as staffing. We really sold this as these should be augmentation staffing. Do not let any of these individuals replace anybody on your staffing model, because they're here today, gone tomorrow. They could be deployed, all could be deployed at one time tomorrow. So don't leave yourself short in the event that happens. And that's one message that we made sure that we socialized with everybody when we had these discussions. So I'll let somebody else take it from there.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one of the things that we did write into the Blue Book when we were thinking about this was a plan of action in case your team or any member of your team does get deployed. Very important to think about that in advance. Let's go to Dr. Bulger. And as you answer these questions, let us know if there were people that actually said, no, we don't want to have that partnership in our institution, if you got pushback from anybody.
Yeah, so thank you. We didn't get any major pushback, but I agree with exactly what Jeff said. You have to be really inclusive in socializing this, and you have to get buy-in from all the leadership, not only in the hospital, but in the School of Medicine. I think it's important the department chairs in the departments that these folks are going to have faculty appointments are fully engaged. You have to reassure people that there's not going to be a significant impact on residency training or anything like that, that it's only going to be beneficial to residents. So I think there's a lot of groundwork to lay to really make sure that you have strong buy-in and support. I agree with all the legal things. We had to make sure that the nursing union, for example, wasn't going to have an issue with this because we're adding additional staff, and we had part of that was making clear that these are additional staff and it's not going to replace any unionized jobs or anything like that. So there's a lot of groundwork to lay to just make sure that you can hit the ground with success and you have the backing of everybody that you need.
Thank you. Dr. Schwab.
Thanks. I'm really not going to repeat a bunch of the things that were said. I think what Jeff and other people are talking about is identifying a group of executive champions. And those executive champions are the people that really run the health system. And run is a nice way of words to go ahead and say that they make sure that profitability is guaranteed in order for them to sustain the mission. And I think it would be foolish not to take ample time to identify executive champions so that those executive champions really understand that finances are not going to be interfered with, perhaps enhanced. Secondly, that these individuals, as Jeff pointed out, augment what you have, and you can't build call schedules and other duties. And last, what I think is extremely important is that you understand the culture and who are both the elected leaders on the medical nursing side or appointed leaders, but you also understand those people that are by their position and by their length of service and all those other things, the people that are really the thought leaders within the institution. And so just to cast the net a little bit wider and give it plenty of time. The only way that we were able to avoid pushback was that we, with the executive champions and our 4 chairs of the academic departments in which the physicians would be embedded, we developed some guiding principles. The primary guiding principle is that this program cannot interfere with the primary teaching, education mission. It cannot interfere with the clinical practices, and it cannot interfere with the quality and the safety of any patients. And the second guiding principle was, with a little bit less emphasized, was in all ways, try not to interfere or to disrupt the flow of clinical practices, which is a nice way of saying the primary faculty generating RVUs. With that, and with time, it took us 3 years to socialize this. Penn is a very big and complex institution, like many of the ones that are of my colleagues are speaking about. But it took us 3 years to socialize this and to be able to get all the approvals we needed. Once we had the approvals, we have had no pushbacks at all, just the opposite. Thank you.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my questions. How long does it really take to get these things up and running? For people who applied for the Mission Zero funds this year, there was a very, very short turnaround from when ASPR published the requirements to getting that grant proposal in. I think it was about a month. So you can't do this in a month. You've just said it took you 3 years to get a successful program running. So that's a very important consideration for looking forward to new partnerships. Dr. Schreiber never gets any pushback from his proposals. So let's ask him to address this issue.
Yeah, I won't repeat everything. I think everybody's done a great job of explaining all of the people that need to get involved. I'm going to present the other side of it a little bit. So where we did get pushback, there were departments that were concerned about bringing individuals in who would take operations from their staff and reduce their RVUs. So that was the major concerns that were raised. And the way we address this and the way we address the issue of deployments, which they all get deployed, by the way, in the middle, tends to be in the middle of the rotation. They will be deployed. You can plan on it. The way we address this is what we expanded our capabilities. So we look toward ways in the various areas to expand our capabilities. For instance, we in our situation, acute care surgery, we started having nighttime ICU doctors and weekend emergency general surgery doctors. Things we couldn't do with our current numbers of faculty, but with the additional people allowed us to expand our capabilities, expand our RVUs. So nobody was doing less cases, nobody was receiving less time. And I think that's the key. Think of ways that you can have these people in an expandable role that can expand and contract when they leave, so you really don't lose anything. In the nursing side of things, you can think about having a nurse who goes to the MTPs in the operating room, runs the MTPs. That's an ideal job for those nurses. So by expanding roles, you can avoid taking anything away from any of your current civilian people that are going to always be there and have to function when these people get deployed, as was mentioned, as a group. And I think that's a win-win for everyone. It gets everybody excited, and the naysayers are getting on board and they want a piece of the action if you do it that way.
That's great, Marty. It sounds like creativity is an important part, and also addressing the issue of the GME. That was one of the things that we did put in the Blue Book, was to look at the effect of these programs on the civilian side for GME, something again to consider. Dr. Fraser, Dr. Bailey, either one of you have anything more to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to, that flexibility I think is absolutely key. And, our residents are active duty. We have 30 GME positions that are with the military. And every year we've had an active duty Navy, actually this year for fellows. And so they're very used to having people that are active duty come in and do work with them side by side. We developed what was termed basically buddy call. And so that would allow our primary faculty to be on call, getting the RVUs, building the cases, and then it'd be overseeing some of the military folks that would come in and really not quite have those big trauma cases under their belt or feel comfortable, and they'd be almost mentoring them. They'd come in and do the shifts with them. And so they'd get to be in the operating room with their scrub techs and everything, and their faculty would be the one billing those cases and collecting the RVUs. And then in those times when faculty are off at AAST and get kind of thin, we were able to flex up our military partners and have them take independent call when they're ready. And so they've been absolutely outstanding in trying to, when our faculty get thin on vacation or whatever it happens to be, they'll step up and take call. And then when we come back and we're full complement, they kind of will rotate back to the buddy call system. But always here, always working hard, and getting the reps in, which is the whole entire point for them.
John, do you have anything to add to this? Not hearing anything.
Hey, Peggy, I do have one thing to add to it. Sorry to interrupt you. It's
Yes,
Jeff.
no problem.
So we talk about the idea of a surgeon champion, but I will tell you that, in St. Louis, the original effort to establish a partnership at the Level 1 Trauma Center and its academic affiliate, St. Louis University, was really a challenge, and medical malpractice really almost broke the whole idea. But we had a champion in St. Louis University, one Robert Haney. He was not a surgeon. He was an erudite general internist who happened to be the associate dean for graduate medical education and a trusted leader at St. Louis University. And Dr. Haney really did the heavy lifting to make this happen there. And so I can't overemphasize the importance of having a leader on the civilian side who's going to drive this. And so in any case, that's all I have to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Brian, do you want to read what's in the chat there?
Yeah, there was a comment saying that the individual agrees with not decreasing staffing for additional reasons related to RVU or shift-based compensation, but that unions would have an issue with replacing non-physician staff with free labor. So again, just emphasizing the point that having both physicians and non-physician leadership and union leadership, like Dr. Bulger mentioned, involved is an important part of this.
Great. I think we can take question 3 and 4 together. The first is, how do you integrate a non-credentialed military personnel into practice? For instance, the descriptions of what medics and paramedics do in the field during a deployment is very different than what we normally have in the civilian world. So that's something to consider when they join your faculty and your trauma center. And the second is the liability risk for members who are practicing within your institution. Do they have to buy their own malpractice insurance? Do you provide for that? Do you use your Mission Zero funds to pay for that? So I think we'll go around the crowd with these 2 questions combined to shorten our time a little bit so we can get through all questions. So I'm going to start with John Chovanes. If you could answer question 3 and 4.
Yes, I think it gets back to 2, ma'am, and that is with that team that Dr. Schwab and others have stated. When you have those higher level executives on board, we identified a key member in legal who became our go-to with all the MOUs. So that once they knew that they had the permission from senior leadership to make this happen, we had a lawyer that knew how to say yes. He was prior Department of Justice. So that tied in along with the liability. And we do cover liability most of the time based on we're self-insured. So that wasn't an issue for us. On the non-credentialed military personnel, you raise a wonderful point. We have trauma techs in the Bay, which is like a hybrid EMT. So we slowly brought people in that way, the paramedic or the LPN. The Army, we have LPNs come through here with the SMART program. So that was a good way. And then once the hospital staff became comfortable with that concept, including our other learners, things like IVs, well within their skill set, always safety, as Dr. Schwab and others have said. It allowed the military provider to stay within their area of comfort. And we then didn't get hung up too much on this is your job description. people have been using good judgment, understanding the guardrails, and they've been able to meld into the hospital system. We have a large pre-hospital system, so the paramedics, the 68 whiskeys, the Army goes by number definers of your specialty. They could rotate on the ground, EMS, BLS, or helicopter. So we've always been able to find a spot for anyone and allow them to expand within that spot, because the whole attitude of the hospital has been, this is a good program, it's well managed, and all through the MILDAF office, that central office to handle with problems that inevitably arise. A nurse, gets upset at this person, or someone may have gone out of their lane. It really doesn't happen much, but we have one central point to stay on top of those issues. I think we do.
Yeah, that's a really great point about having a central office. Again, one of the things that we tried to put into the Blue Book was, who is keeping track of what's going on, how many courses are given, where people are being rotated. Those things I think really need to be thought about in advance. Bill Schwab, do you? Yes.
Ma'am, if I could just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Blue Book came out as we were started, and it was so helpful. We were already kind of going with some of the programs, but it gave us a guidebook to clarify, refine, or improve. I think it was a wonderful overlay to help us tighten up areas that we had missed or not met the standards that DOD and the college desired and knew why they desired it. And it gave us a great roadmap to improve what we had already had. Sorry to interrupt.
No, we appreciate the endorsement. And the idea behind the Blue Book was not only to help people set up partnerships, but to allow some structure that the partnerships could be evaluated after they're established, particularly around how the money from Mission Zero is being utilized in those institutions. So thank you for that comment. Bill Schwab, anything to add here about credentialing and liability?
I'll just say one thing. I want to go back to the thing that I think is what the third question is really talking about. And correct me, Brian, if I'm wrong, but that's the fact that I don't know about the Army and the Air Force, but in the Navy, most of the very advanced independent duty corpsmen and even the special operative corpsmen are not certified in a civilian sector as paramedics. Therefore, they can't just jump in and practice as paramedics if assigned in an en route position, for example, helicopter, or in a critical care transport vehicle, because some states require that particular type of certification to be a medic on those. What we did is, it's easier with a helicopter because of the space. But so we have one of those advanced medics with us. The job description and what he has done in his life already is so far beyond what the average medic does in the civilian practice, and no way criticizing what we do in the civilian practice. But what we did is we just tucked him in, and he is the third person on our flight crew, and he is the third person on the vehicles that actually do some of the very, very high-end transports like lung rescue, et cetera. And that really that just took it away. So he could literally start at the end of his orientation as being a practicing crew member with both a nurse and a paramedic. And we, the institution, Penn Medicine, actually went ahead and provided full liability coverage under our master policies for all of the military providers, not only at the Penn hospitals, but when they do a regional rotation to one of our regional partners, for example, for burn or for pediatric. So they're fully covered.
Dr. Bulger?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I think the value of fully embedding people and giving them faculty appointments within the departments means that they get covered by the liability. We are too self-insured. And so by very nature of being embedded and having that faculty appointment, you get covered. So that really helped us deal with that problem. We've not really had to integrate non-credentialed military personnel that much, other than the rotating people, the rotating medics, and those are all proctored in their experiences, like kind of what was described. So they can do those things with some nursing supervision. And that works fine.
Dr. Kerby had the opportunity to visit your institution once, which was great, and met with some of those soft, I think you call them, teams, which are very different than anything that our pre-hospital people would ever do. Did you have an issue with getting them credentialed and paid for their liability?
No issues with credentialing for any of the SOS teams. Our PJ soft medics, our idea was that we wanted them to train at the top of their license. So we really developed a TAA that had some broad language in there about they would work under our license and under our supervision so that they could do all those procedures that they would do in the field. We are self-insured. We have a professional liability and trust fund. I think that's similar to New Jersey that handles our malpractice. And so there was no cost to that. That's absorbed by the university. So no issues there.
Dr. Fraser, how about in Nevada?
Yeah, I think kind of what Dr. Bulger mentioned with the nurse supervision, the aerospace medical techs, the AMTs, they can do their full scope of practice. They actually had a Nevada statute that would allow for this to be underneath the supervision of a nurse. We've had done work at the health district, trying to actually pass other laws. I know that gets a little bit complicated, but it actually went as far as that years ago, that they were allowed to practice in that scope. With the SOST expansion we had in 2020, they actually went down and reviewed their Air Force career field training and educational plan. And then that was passed by the health district that I was actually chair sitting there, that they would go ahead and allow them to practice their full scope based off of reviewing what was already established in their DOPs. As far as our faculty go, they are fully embedded, like I mentioned, and get credentialed with the university. And we put them right into the practice plan with medical malpractice and stuff. And that kind of goes into their pot. And then what they actually will bill and generate as income will pay back those costs. And that's how we do that for the faculty.
This is really, really helpful to understand how you all address these two issues, which are, really key. It's also good to hear that the military members are not being asked to pay their own liability insurance, which is a question that has come up quite a bit. So thank you for that. Marty, Schreiber, anything to add here?
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said. I would just point out that in the SMART program, the individuals are working across the hospital and outside the hospital. In all cases, have to work under someone else's license who's their supervisor. So it's challenging in a 2 or 3 week period to have someone assigned to 6 or 12 individuals on a daily basis because they're rotating around. And so in advance of their rotation, you have to identify these supervisors and make sure you have enough and a backup program because it is extensive.
Right. Dr. Bailey?
Yeah, so everything that's been said, absolutely. The other piece I'd offer is the presence of an embedded, full-time cadre that includes, nursing representation and then representation for the non-privileged specialties. So in other words, if you're going to intend to rotate Air Force 4N or EMTs through a facility, have a person on the military side that understands exactly what that is, and on the nursing side in your cadre that can liaise, with nursing services, because that's where this really falls to, and build trust and establish, no kidding, down on paper, what is it that these folks are expected to be able to do, and not in terms of just observational experience, but direct care experience. And again, like I said, cadre, it's so critical to the continuity of a program like this. Over.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I'm going to let Brian manage a couple of the questions from our audience.
Yeah, great. So we have 2 questions. This first one will probably just be kind of a quick shot to each of the panelists. The question's from Dr. Rachel Hideout at UC Davis. Did the partnering DoD sites initiate contacts for these partnerships, or did the civilian sites reach out to the DoD? So basically the question is, who asked who first? Did the civilian institution, did your institution go to the DoD, or did the DoD come to your institution? Maybe I'll direct this first to Dr. Schreiber.
We were contacted by DoD
Okay. Dr.
and
Fraser.
asked to embed our program. We started with the AMCT program. That got expanded. Then we were asked to start the SMART. And once you're in, be flexible and willing to expand at any possible rate.
Dr. Fraser, good advice.
Yeah, I mean, after that National Defense Authorization Act in '96, it was kind of both ways. I think for ours, it was we had prior surgeons that were active duty or retired, and then as an educational pathway, kind of proposed this idea. I don't think it was anything that was, from the Air Force Base coming here and asking for that, but it's kind of a joint thing where we had people that were working at the civilian level after their military experience and had that idea, and they were the ones that had championed it at that time.
Great, thanks. Dr. Schwab.
We're going to answer that by formally or informally. So let me just say, I'm going to go back to something that Jeff Bailey brought up, and that is that trusted leader. One of our trusted leaders was a retired 3-star admiral, medical or MSc Corps, Administrative Corps. Numerous conversations took place within the first 6 months between our executive group and myself and certain people at the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. But we formally were asked to submit a letter on behalf of Penn Medicine to say that we would be interested. And that actually led then to more vigorous negotiations and speed ahead. A year later, we were awarded a letter that said they would establish a training program at Penn.
Great, thanks. Dr. Bulger.
Yeah, the Army reached out to us actually several years ago, and it took many years for them to and many site visits for them to decide what type of program they wanted to put here.
Yeah.
But they initiated the contact.
Great. And then Dr. Kerby.
Yeah, so an Air Force colleague of mine who was the command surgeon for the 720th Special Tactics Squadron, when they lost their New Orleans site, reached out to me, and that was in 2006, and that's when we established the PJ program at UAB. Then it was like the field of dreams. You build it, they will come, and that led to the SOST opportunity starting in 2010. So both times they reached out to us.
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of DoD reaching out individually to institutions with kind of that snowballing into a bigger relationship over time in each of these cases. Dr. Chovanes, what was your experience?
DoD came to us, however, as an active reservist. One develops deeper contacts when you're wearing the uniform, and that helps foster knowledge about your own program. That's one we haven't spoken about the Reserve Corps much, but wearing both hats helps build many bridges. And as was stated, you build it, they will come. As far as Department of State, they came to us, DOJ, DHS, but people move around in jobs and you become a trusted partner with them. And they know if they need to get people through in a quality manner, they can reach out to you. So they start coming to you.
It's a great point. And then Dr. Bailey, having been on both sides of this, both on the military side, setting these up, and now on the civilian side, managing these, what's been your experience and how these are initiated?
So the genesis of the program actually was, as was just described, it was Air National Guard flight surgeon who happened to also be the trauma medical director of a civilian level 2 trauma center in the community that started the whole thing in St. Louis. But then it was driven by the Air Force Surgeon General. So I would say again, it was an experience that was based on someone understood both worlds, and then the Air Force definitely came to St. Louis heavy to get this going over.
It's great. Thanks to all the panelists. And just one final question that's out there. There was a question posted specifically about the AMCT3 sites, whether those were strictly for fellowship trained trauma surgeons or were there different specialties or general surgery, general surgeons there. So I'd direct that maybe to the Army sites first. So Dr. Schreiber, Dr. Bulger.
Yes, all of ours are fellowship trained, have been through surgical critical care fellowships at a minimum.
Ours have as well, and I think that that makes it so much easier to integrate them right away. We've talked about what to do if they send us a general surgeon. I think it's going to be much more difficult to fully embed them, just the way that our programs are structured. But we'd be willing to entertain that. But up to now, we've had fully fellowship trained, so they're critical care boarded, and they fit right into the faculty very easily.
Dr. Chovanes.
Same thing, the Army MOS identifier 61J Mike 4, that's a trauma surgeon. And they are all that. And we have a neurosurgeon and our the Army emergency medicine, everybody's boarded. And of course, the Army neurosurgeon is also, but they are trauma surgeons. I agree with Dr. Bulger. I think it would be a little bit more difficult if it was a general surgeon. Although we do ACS, and of course, but in trauma, they probably need a closer guardian angel than the Army trauma surgeons. When you have somebody like Kerby here, he teaches us more than we teach him.
That's great. And maybe I'll just open it up to any of the panelists, just kind of wild card. Do any of you have any embedded general surgeons within the trauma programs at your institutions? Looks like Dr. Kerby, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, opposite experience with us. All of our SAS surgeons aren't fellowship trained. Some come straight out of residency to our program.
I'll just, if I could comment and follow up on Jeff, our prototype is actually, we have, and in the future, the Navy will have a permanent cadre, which will always be a fellowship trained trauma and critical care surgeon. But actually the principal deployable asset in surgery for the Navy will be general surgeons. So we have general surgeons as well who are here, not in our fellowship. We run a fellowship, and we have military fellows, at least 2 per year with us. That's different. But this is a general surgeon assigned to us, embedded for 3 years, learning these type of skills, getting ready to start as others are doing this. 3-year embedded with smaller teams, principally general surgeons learning these skills for rapid deployment.
And there is a transition period. The way we're set up here is we have at least 2, sometimes 3 surgeons on call every night covering different aspects of the clinical platform that we have. So there's always somebody there that can cover down and help out. But we don't release them into independent practice until we're comfortable with their skill set.
I'm going to reinforce that. Exactly the same with us, Jeff. Exactly the same. Yep.
That's
Same
great.
in St. Louis. There's general surgeons that have been embedded for more than a decade. And I think that's the key to it, is to make sure you get enough left seat, right seat time with them to give them comfort in what they're participating in. The general surgeons do participate in emergency general surgery and independently in trauma call, but also I think, as Dr. Kerby said, there's a robust backup schedule to backstop them if needed over.
Yeah,
that's great. And Dr. Fraser.
Yeah, we had the same concept, and lots of general surgeons. Some graduates actually from the general surgery program would stay and work out in Nellis Air Force Base, and then come back to take trauma call, and that's where that buddy call really comes in and benefits. And if they've been out doing general surgery at a base for quite some time and doing some simple stuff that they've come back and told us, it's a little bit different walking into the trauma bay at 2 a.m. and having stuff get real quick. And that's when we're there as backing up for them. And they just, as they get those reps in and get the comfort level and get to know the nurses and the residents and the staff and really feel confident, then that's when we kind of release them for that independent call. And everybody's a little different with that, but it's been working well.
That's great. And that's a great discussion. And thanks to each of you for engaging on this and for the answers. I think we're going to call an audible. We're going to roll the final question over to one of the next sessions. We're about 5 minutes over. I wanted to start on behalf of Colonel Gurney and the Military Liaison Committee of the AAST. Thanks to each of the panelists for taking the time to come and explain your programs and the work that you've done to the group here. This has been extraordinarily useful. It's good to hear the differences between the programs, and then some of the similarities on how challenging problems have been worked out. And that's really a function of the leadership that each of you and your institutions have provided, and it's certainly appreciated. We'd also like to thank the Board of Managers for the AAST for making this possible. This comes at a cost, and we appreciate the fact that the AAST has been willing to lean into that and make this a priority as this has become a priority from a funding standpoint from the federal government as well.